Hi, this is JP Morgan.
And Megan Arima.
And it's time for another episode of the Laws of Light here on the Slanted Lens. The last episode you should reference for this one is the 5 lighting portrait positions. That'll give you a good foundation of what a 1 light setup is. Today we're going to expand that into a 3 light setup. Everyone should understand a 3 light setup, know how to set it up and to use it, because you'll use it in interviews, you'll use it for portraits, you'll use it for just about everything you do, and there's several reasons why you use it, and I'm going to talk about each one of those. So let's get started and see what we can do. So let's break down a 3 light setup. First off, for most people it's very difficult to know where to set the first light. Go back to the 5 portrait lighting positions and choose a place that's going to give you a nice light on her face. Right now I've got the light up slightly. I'm allowing the shadow to break from her nose and to cross into her cheeks. She has beautiful cheekbones, so it's really easy to get a nice Rembrandt light on her face. We're using a 300D for our key light here, the Aperture 300D, which is a fabulous continuous light. In the background we have 120D, not quite as powerful as the 300D, but it has that same Bowens mount. It allows me to put reflectors, grids, and softboxes, whatever you need to on these kinds of lights, because they have that Bowens mount that allow them to interface with all the different modifiers you're used to. But now the very first thing that I always attack when I'm in this position is I have shadows. Well, we talked about this in the 1 light. If I want to resolve my shadows here, I can simply slide a light in, the reflector in. With that single light, I've now lit her face and I have brought a lot of light into the shadows, and it looks nice on her face. But the next reason we add a light is because we need to separate her from the background. Now you can do it for interest as well, but usually the first reason we do it is because we want to separate her from the background. So we can do that in one of 2 ways. I can turn a light on the background, and that just simply means that I have now separated her from the background. Because the background is brighter than she is, I get complete separation on her hair from the background. That's one way to do it. Or I can turn on a rim light. The rim light will separate her from the background. Usually I use a combination of these 2. I like the rim light, I like what it's doing on her shoulder. Now if we turn our light on the background, we can decide how we want to place this, and there's several different thoughts on placing this light. I can just simply pan it in from the side and just do a little bit of light on the side there. Kind of separates her from that one side. Just gives me a little glow from left to right, or from right to left. I can take and make it down on the floor and just let it come up so it glows behind her shoulders a little bit. Starts to separate her, depending on how much of that I like. You can put a spotlight right behind her. Just spotlights her completely on that background from behind. It's just important that that background light is dark enough that it doesn't overpower the foreground, and yet it's powerful enough that it separates her from the background. The reason you add light is to separate and create dimension and depth, and to create interest. Those are the things you want to do. You want to separate, create dimension and depth, and to create interest. So in this case, we've created separation with our rim light, we've created depth with our background light, and then we've opened up the shadows with our reflector. It's really important to understand that in this process, if you're shooting inside in any kind of a studio kind of situation, or in a room where you're going to set up artificial lights, one is the further you get her away from the background, the more control you have of the background. Now that's going to be controlled by certain things. If you put a seamless up, you can only get her so far away before you get off from the seamless. Although the longer the lens you put on, then that means it's going to keep you onto your background, because it brings the background in closer, and a small background is going to cover on a longer lens. But it means you have to get your camera further away from the subject. So wider lens means you get closer to the subject. So in a small room you can get closer and you have room to work. Longer lens means you get further away from the subject, so you have to have a larger room. But the further you get her away from the background, the more control you're going to have of the light from the background and from on her face, because then you have the ability to control the light on the background and it doesn't affect her face. If you got someone smashed up and they're 3 or 4 feet away from the background, it becomes impossible to light the background separate from her face. So that's really the principle. The principle with the 3 light setup is allowing you to have complete control of the lighting that you're working on, and the way you do that is by getting her as far away from the background as possible. Now some things I use to mitigate that problem of spilling light is I always put grids on the softbox. Now that keeps that light right on her face. If I pull this grid off, I got light all over the background. And that's a really difficult thing to control. So we talked about interest. One way to introduce interest to the image is to add gels to your light. You can add gel to the backlight. That's the rim light on her hair. You see the red in her hair? Now, if it makes sense and it works for your subject matter, that's a way to add a little bit of interest and to add a little bit of depth. Generally speaking, I don't go with red on a rim light on her hair because it's just, what is there, something on fire back there or what's going on? But I usually use something that's a little more organic, maybe some blue. So there's a blue light from the background. Now you can see this on her hair. It's not as strong. One other thing I can do is I can add blue to the shadow area of her face by just simply putting blue over the reflector. And I'll push that reflector in when I do that. This is very simple and subtle. This is not a heavy-handed use of gels. It just allows you to give you a little something, makes it a little interesting. This 3-light setup is very, very similar to a lot of things I do when I shoot corporate kinds of portraits. It gives you a great separation, gives you a little bit of interest. Okay, what if you don't have 3 lights? Is there a way to do a 3-light setup if you don't have 3 lights? Well, let's see. So here we are, back to our key light only. We only have 1 light going. Remember the principle. I said if you want complete control of your light, you've got to get your subject as far away from the background as possible. I've got a pretty dark background back here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get her closer to the background because that allows me to light the background with my 1 light. So let's move you back to about there. I will bring this light to here. I'm going to take off my grid. So there's the light on her, background's still dark. I bring the light in, the background starts to brighten up. I'll now bring in my reflector and open up the side of her face. And then the last thing I'll do is with a $1.95 mirror that I get from Home Depot, I'm going to give myself a rim light on her hair. Now it's not as finessed, it's not as nice as when you have 3 lights to set that up because you have to make a lot of compromises. This light's going to just have to blast the background and make it to come up. You can feather it a little bit, but you can't feather the light off from the front of her. It just means you're going to have to make a lot of compromise. Your rim light on her hair is not going to be near as bright because it's not as efficient coming off from this light. So we make a lot of compromises. But a 3-light setup is really basics for a lot of what's done in photography and video. Now you may say to yourself, well, how creative can you be with that? Well, most all people are the same, but they are all completely different. Basically, we're all the same, but we all are very unique. So how you apply a 3-light setup is the same way. The way you light the background, the ratios that you choose to use, the color gels you use, the things that you use to mix this thing up really becomes a foundation for making that 3-light setup grow and become what you want to do with it and become your creative style. So there you have it, a 3-light setup. The basics for just about every lighting setup that you'll do in video, in still photography, portraits, interviews, all those kinds of things evolve around a 3-light setup. So keep those cameras rolling and keep on clicking. Don't estimate alone. Don't stand out in the cold all by yourself. Try to put together an estimate? Go to theslantedlens.com/estimating. I've got a digital download that will teach you everything you need to know. You don't have to be alone any longer. So make sure you leave a comment on our lesson today. We would love to have your comments. Let us know what you're thinking about the things we're teaching, some perspective that you have. It always helps our community. Also join our Facebook group. We have a great community there where you can join and be able to share images and get feedback from other people in the community. So join us, like us, love us, Facebook us, whatever things, and I can't think of anything else exciting to say. So.
You didn't say subscribe.
So subscribe.
Subscribe.
Now,
Today,
push the
right
button, now.
It's